Let's talk about St. Ignatius of Loyola. So last week we talked about St. Benedict and the whole Lectio Divina prayer method. This week we're going to be focusing on Ignatian meditation, which was started by St. Ignatius of Loyola. So who was this saint? He was born on October 23rd in 1491, and he died in 1556. So he lived a nice full life. For those of you who know your history well, his birth years should give you a little reminder or trigger a little something in your brain. So 1491, something happens the very next year. Hint, it starts with a C and ends in Olympus. So if you got Christopher Columbus, you're correct. So the whole new world, whole new continents were discovered starting a year after St. Ignatius is born. So that hugely influences his life and where he takes his spirituality and the direction he takes his life. So who was this St. Ignatius guy? He was the youngest of 13 children, which already is a lot. I'm the oldest of 7 kids, and 13, I can't even begin to imagine 13 kids. He definitely was not a holy child. He was the exact opposite of St. Benedict. So he became a military page as a young boy to one of his uncles. And then he went on to join the military when he was 17. And then he definitely wanted to grow up to be the rich and famous type. He spent his time carousing and drinking and doing all sorts of things that you would expect from a normal guy in his 20s, living a very popular and famous lifestyle. He definitely thought his faith was boring. He believed in God. He definitely believed in God, but in terms of practice of faith and of virtue, not so much. He committed a lot of crimes, and he almost got convicted for some of them. He definitely killed people. He definitely did all sorts of sins that you would think unimaginable. So he went to war in Spain, and when he was 30, something drastically happened that changed his life. His leg got shattered by a cannonball during a battle. And from there, he was holed up in a castle trying to recuperate for months and months and months. And so you can imagine what that was like. He was bored out of his mind. If you think this quarantine is boring, at least you have technology. He didn't have anything. So he was in bed for months and months, and he even underwent multiple surgeries because one of the bones in his leg started to protrude out of his leg, and that bothered him. He wouldn't look good in the tight pants that men wore at the time. And so he underwent surgery without anesthesia to have the bone on his leg shaved down. Ouch. He did end up walking with a limp the rest of his life, though. So while he was convalescing, while he was just sitting there lying in bed, books were hard to come by. They were a rare and expensive commodity. So the place that he was staying had only 3 books for months and months and months and months. He only had 3 books to read. One of them, and they were all religious books, by the way, not what he was used to reading. So one of the books that he read that changed his life was a book on the life of Jesus. And the author encouraged the reader to imagine yourself at the different points in Jesus' life, specifically at the crib in the manger scene and looking at the baby Jesus. So because St. Ignatius didn't have anything better to do, and even though these were the last books he would have wanted to read, he did end up reading them. And he underwent this incredible conversion experience. So from that point on, he started praying more. He started gobbling up everything he could get his hands on Christianity and the Christian faith. And it was during this time when he was bedridden that he developed the beginnings of several key things that helped change the entire Catholic Church, actually. So he started noticing that he would imagine certain things going on in his head because you have nothing better to do when you're lying in bed trying to heal your shattered leg, and You've read through all the books twice and nobody's coming to talk to you. And so what do? You just spend your day imagining. So he realized that after imagining certain things, he would feel intense joy that would be followed by intense sadness later. Like a few hours later, the next day, he'd be intensely sad after having imagined these things. Whereas other things, when he imagined them, he would be filled with intense joy, and that joy remained. And then other times, he would be imagining things that filled him with joy and intense happiness and excitement while he was imagining them, but then left them with intense sadness and vacancy in his heart. This was the beginnings of his method of what we call now discernment of spirits. This is huge in Catholic spirituality, and not too many Catholics actually know much about it, unfortunately. But it's basically how to tell who's talking to you when you're praying, who's talking to you in your daily life. Are you hearing your own voice? Or are you hearing God's voice? Are you hearing Satan's voice? Are you hearing, he likes to call him the enemy, are you hearing the enemy's voice? So St. Ignatius develops what we call the discernment of spirits, and it starts when he's just sitting in bed doing nothing else. The other thing that he develops is based on this book that he read where he was imagining himself in front of the baby Jesus. He developed a more concrete imaginative prayer method that we call Ignatian meditation, and that's what we're going to be learning in our next video. So these two things were huge for the development of the church. Huge. So what happens? He rests up, he gets better, and then he decides to try and follow in the footsteps of St. Francis of Assisi, and he becomes a beggar and a hermit. Do you notice a theme between him and St. Benedict? Hermits are kind of a thing in the Catholic world. So he decides to go and try and be a beggar after having been a nobleman for 30 plus years of his life. He decides to try and give up everything and go become a beggar for a year, and he tries to live in a cave for 7 months. That only lasts about a year. Colossal failure. So from there, he realizes that he's not called to be like St. Francis nor St. Benedict, and he decides that he wants to go back to university. So he goes back and he starts studying theology and Latin for the next 10 years of his life. During that time, he accumulates these 6 friends, of whom 2 of them become saints as well. So St. Francis Xavier and then St. Peter Faber. Between St. Ignatius, St. Francis Xavier, St. Peter Faber, and then 4 others, they found what is now today called the Jesuits, the Society of Jesus. So this order, this group that was started with a very specific intention, because when St. Ignatius is converting, so right around the time when he's 30, a little bit before, a little bit after, there's another major thing that's happening in the world, besides the discovery of 2 whole new continents on a different side of the planet, and that the fact that our planet is actually round. We have the Protestant Reformation, Martin Luther, John Calvin. All of this is exploding in Europe right around the same time that St. Ignatius of Loyola is converting. So you have Europe split, you have the Catholic Church split, and St. Ignatius sees this, and he needs to do something about it. So he and these other 6 men, with the Society of Jesus and all the men that follow them, start spreading out all over Europe, all over Asia. St. Francis Xavier makes it to Japan and India and starts converting people in Japan and India. These men just traveled the globe trying to teach people about what Catholicism really is. And the whole point was that so many people were leaving the Catholic Church and becoming Protestant because they didn't fully understand what the Catholic Church actually taught. And so St. Ignatius, along with his followers, really wanted to prevent that by educating people well. And so the Jesuits are still known today for their incredible education system. They started schools, they started universities. Our current Pope, Pope Francis, is a Jesuit himself. So anyway, he lived an incredible, dynamic, amazing life. He started out in a completely different direction, and God's just like, we're getting back on this path. So God sets him in a trajectory, and because of St. Francis Xavier, so many things changed in the church. So many things changed in the church. So anyway, we owe him a tremendous debt. We're tremendously grateful that God sent us someone like St. Ignatius. He died in 1556 of a fever in Rome. He was visiting the Pope at the time. And today he is also known as the patron saint of soldiers, since he was one, and also of retreats, since he developed a retreat. Among all, his prayer method is only one thing that he did. He developed a retreat method. He developed a nighttime prayer routine. He did so much for prayer. So he's known for retreat, being the patron saint of retreats and the patron saint of soldiers. So that's St. Ignatius of Loyola in a nutshell. Our next video, we will be talking about his prayer method and how it developed and what to do. Ciao!